Hey, I'm Jill Deacon. Welcome to another episode of the Apple featured podcast, A Love Affair with the Unknown. It is so great to be back with you for a third season. Can't believe we're here. Listen, I got to say, just quickly, if you're enjoying the podcast, I want to take just a minute to remind you about my new book of the same title, A Love Affair with the Unknown, Leaning into the Uncertainty of Modern Life, is out this very month. It is available at your local bookstore and everywhere else. It has been called a masterclass in the art and science of grappling with uncertainty. I got to say, really proud of this book. I feel, dare I say, certain that you will find some comfort on those pages, no matter what life is throwing at you. So check out your local bookstore or wherever for A Love Affair with the Unknown. On to today's guest on the A Love Affair with the Unknown podcast, at whom life has thrown a lot. Stephen Page. Stephen Page became a household name, a chart-topping music sensation with the band that he founded way back in 1988, Barenaked Ladies, of course. He's been a solo artist now for more than 15 years since the band's rather infamous breakup. What Stephen Page has also been for the last many years is remarkably candid about his struggles, including struggles with mental health. He is a passionate mental health advocate, someone who is constantly inventive with his creativity. He has composed work for television, for the Stratford Festival. He's released 5 studio albums, toured extensively, including with the Stephen Page Trio, and there's one particular show in Norway I want to ask him about and get to for a second on that. Anyway, Stephen is a very public example of courageously navigating hard things and finding joy and purpose along the way. So, Stephen Page, thank you for being here. Welcome to A Love Affair with the Unknown.
Hey, Jill. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
So nice to see you again. It's been too long. And I should apologize right off the top for my voice, which is a little wonky. It hasn't been the same since I had thyroid surgery back in September. And so I'm saying that partly to explain why it sounds a little weird. I'm told it's going to get back to normal, but it hasn't yet. But also because I watched you have a TED Talk about the voice and as it sort of your tool for pushing emotion is part of what you talked about in that TED Talk. And I found that very relatable and powerful. I mean, this is my tool too, is my voice.
Right.
So yeah, but I thought I certainly related to that, the idea of pushing your emotion through your voice, something you've done in all kinds of ways.
Well, can I ask, like, how you feel about the fact that you have a voice that's not doing the things you're used to it doing? I mean, you've obviously had such a long struggle with all of these kinds of things, but
I have.
for me, it's a specific nightmare. So I wonder how you feel.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, and that is why I wanted to mention that, because it is, for a lot of people, my voice, as a radio broadcaster. I mean, I broadcast in TV as well, so the visual is in some ways part of my work, but my voice is kind of my thing, and it's for some people, it's how they recognize me, and it's partly we all kind of recognize ourselves by our own voice. So when it doesn't sound like you and it doesn't work the way you are accustomed to it working. I mean, talking is in some ways seems like the most falling off a log type of thing to do. And when you can't do it properly and express the full range of emotion, when I get really excited and I want to go up here, it just can't go there.
Right.
But I get excited a lot, so I can't express that. So yeah, it is a challenge. It is a challenge. And it's so bad for being a podcast host. So I apologize to listeners for grinding through this. If I talk low down, things get a lot better.
I think that's the thing. You have to find the place where it still feels like you in a way. And
Have you had moments where you've lost your voice and felt fear that your whole self was, gonna have to redirect?
100%. And like, I don't have a lot of memory of losing my voice when I was in the Barenaked Ladies, but some of that was just because it was youth. By the time I was 38, when I split from the band. So still, fairly supple vocal cords and stuff. And, you can overdo it and heal quickly. Um, and I always felt like if my voice was rough on a certain day, that I was enough of an entertainer that people wouldn't necessarily notice. Like there was,
Right.
especially by the time we were playing arenas and so on, and you're running around the stage. There's a lot of other, big visual things that kind of take over, where the detail that you hear in your voice might get compromised. But then when I became a solo artist, I found I was losing my voice more often, and
Mhm.
I was a smoker for years, so there was obviously had an impact on it. Uh, but also, I think I look back now and I think anxiety was like the number one reason why I was losing my voice, and I couldn't admit it to myself. So I would lose my voice. We'd go to the UK. I'd be so excited to do a UK tour again, and by show 3, my voice was gone, or I'd get sick with something. And I remember playing right when I started the Stephen Page Trio, so it would have been 2016. We played 2 weeks. We had a 2-week residency at the Carlisle in New York City, like on the Upper East Side. It's a fancy old hotel with a very famous kind of cabaret bar in it, where Cheetah Rivera will play, or Elaine Stritch would play, and so on.
Wow.
And so this was the debut of the Stephen Page Trio, and we went, and it's a very small room, and we were trying to figure out how to balance our volumes on stage. It's just the 3 of us, but still, I'm used to having things loud on stage to be able to hear myself. And I'm blasting away, and my voice is gone by night 2, mostly gone. To me, it's gone. And
Mm.
so I get an appointment with this ear, nose, and throat guy in the Upper East Side of New York City. It's like the basement of this brownstone, and you walk through, and it's like this dusty looks like an old laboratory, like just dusty, um, uh, uh, um, uh, cobwebs hanging off of test tubes and stuff is what it looked like, in beakers. You get to the back, and this guy, he's straight out of a Coen Brothers movie, like giant glasses, little tiny head, must be 90. And he looks down my throat and he goes, "Well, it's a little red in there. It's not too bad." He said, "Remember, it's not Madison Square Garden. You don't have to shout it. They can hear you." And then the
Okay.
other thing he said to me, though, was, "Remember, they don't know." Like, he was right. I mean,
They
he's
don't know that you're not related to Bonnie Tyler?
well, they just don't know that your voice isn't the way you want it to be. You
Right,
can get
right.
sound out of it. You just might be dealing with other stuff. And he's like, he's like, you need to find a way to relax into this. And it's going to
Mm.
relax the stress you're putting on your vocal cords too.
And so did that work? That idea of relaxing your mind and letting the vocal cords and the rest of your body follow?
I think it took a good 5 years after that
I
before I
was gonna
really
say,
understood
surely it
that.
didn't work by that night on
No.
that stage.
Well, that's like the same, like with, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the thing that kind of like cracked my brain open and allowed me to start to heal and become a better version of myself, the version of myself that I always saw. But people say, and they say in the practice too, it's could be 10 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy, and then you're done. Like, it's not an ongoing lifelong relationship with your therapist the way analysis would have been, or whatever else. And we finished, because there's a lot of like paperwork, kind of like homework, busy stuff.
Mhm.
And you think, well, how's this going to rewire my brain in 10 sessions? And theoretically, it's supposed to, but I say it took 10 years before,
Right.
those
Of
practices.
practicing that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Of practicing those tools before you go, oh, this is now second nature. You can take a step back. And it's the
Mhm.
same thing with vocal stuff. I know that there were lots of bad practices, some that I can feel it now when I'm talking to you. I sing, I'm so physically aware of what I'm doing when I'm singing. And when I'm talking, it's all from my collarbone up. Like, it's like I've neglected all of my singing training when I
Right.
speak. So other things like, being sitting in a moving van all day talking to my friends, which I love to do, and I'm a chatterbox, um, is not necessarily great by the third show in a row too. And I'm not good at learning that stuff, just because I think I'm willfully ignoring it. But when it comes to singing, I think, honestly, so much changed for me during the pandemic, and in a very positive way. I mean, it was such a negative time for almost all of us, but I was
Mm.
able to find the good in it. And for me, like, that's my greatest success story, as a singer, as a musician, and as a person. I think, in a way, just being able to kind of figure out my place.
Well, I don't know all the details of what you are referring to with the pandemic, but I know that one of the things that you did that I did wanna ask you about, which was such a inspiring illustration of adapting to the uncertainty of a moment, in this case, the pandemic, you created the Live from Home series. I mean, somebody who makes their, um, living, making music with other people in closed spaces like recording sessions, and then sharing it with other people in contained spaces like concert venues. Obviously, you and every other musical artist, and I spoke to a lot of them during that time, obviously were in some kind of crisis and had to pivot, the famous
Sure.
verb of the of the pandemic. And I know you're still doing it. You just had one a couple nights ago, and you've got that great song on your album Zoom. I I even want to say a line that I love from that song because it I hear these lyrics and they sound a lot like mindfulness and focusing on what you can control. I'll zoom into your living room and try not to focus on when this all ends. I mean, is that kind of what you mean when you say that the pandemic became an opportunity for you to sort of reframe how you deal with hard things?
Yeah, in a million different ways. Like I think about it on a personal level. I watched all of my kids graduate in 2020. Um, all three of my kids. My eldest graduated from with his master's in orchestral conducting in
Hmm.
May of 2020, and of course, in May of 2020, there were no orchestras to conduct. My middle kid graduated with their bachelor's in musical theater performance in 2020, and there was nowhere to perform there. And my youngest graduated high school in 2020, and then went into a university dorm and never set foot in a classroom for the entire first year of university. So I watched these resilient and brilliant kids uh, figure out a way to be themselves, to fulfill their interests, to find their own communities that way. That was one thing, but it's really painful to watch your kids, have that difficult situation. And then my stepkids, my youngest was still in high school and really struggling with online learning. And then I watched what was happening with our music business. And the first thing I was seeing, I was kind of taking it lightly, but I would see in the early days the kind of the generosity from so many of the big names out there by doing Instagram lives and Facebook lives and that kind of thing. And for me, it made me think, oh, great. Now that one thing is now free too. Everybody expects everything to be free. We over the last 20 years learned to kind of give away the recorded music, that it was like essentially recorded music became an advertisement for your brand or for your live concert or whatever else, rather than the thing that we used to tour in order to sell records. And now
Right.
you'd make a record just to have an excuse to tour because promoters might not want to book you unless you have something new because they feel like they can piggyback on your publicity machine. So I've already gotten my head around that, and then there's Garth Brooks in his kitchen doing a free concert. It's like, well, how do you compete with that now? Even that's
Right.
free. And then I saw my friend Dan Mangan, singer songwriter from Vancouver, and I saw
Yeah.
he has this great company called Side Door,
Side
which
door.
yeah, and
Yeah.
Side Door is amazing because what it does is it matches musicians up with people who want to host house concerts. House concerts are a real thing, particularly in Canada, where artists go and they play to a private group of people in somebody's living room or backyard or whatever else. But this was a way where you could actually like make your own tour this way. They could figure out, they could sell the tickets for you. They could kind of be the conduit. They both be the agent and the ticketing agency and the promoter all at once, and make it easier for both parties. Well, of course, what are you going to do when the pandemic hits? They pivoted to being able to sell tickets to live streams. So I tuned into one of Dan's, and it was on Zoom, and kind of a light bulb went off. I thought, this actually looks fun. Like I'm going to try this, because the difference is he not only could they see Dan, the audience could see Dan, but he could see the audience, and they could
Mm.
see each other. And there's also a chat going on the side too, so you can have this communication between people. So I tried it, and at that point, like the most number of people you could have in a Zoom that wasn't like a lecture, like where you could actually see the people, I think it was 1,000 people. And we sold 1,000 tickets, like it actually sold out. People were like, how does a Zoom meeting get sold out? I don't know. It was amazing, and we had all the technical difficulties that we all remember from 2020 of the audio not working
Sure.
and the echoes and the people bombing the Zoom things with like porn, and it was all the worst stuff. We figured out all the different ways of defeating that. I spent all this time kind of developing an audio system where people could actually get hi-fi audio on their end that was in sync with the video. And
Wow.
then I started doing stuff like, how do I get another video I can play along with? Like maybe I can get Craig and Kevin from the trio. Um, Maybe I can get them to pre-record something, and I'll play along to that and make it look like we're playing live together. So initially we'd do it like I'd hold up my iPad with them on it, and I'd like sing along with it. And eventually I figured out, with help from fans, particularly, like how to get this stuff working technically. And I started doing it every week.
Hmm.
And it became a thing, not just for the fans to look forward to, but for me, when we were in that time when time was nebulous, we didn't even know what it was and how to mark things. It was a thing to mark the week for me. And I started, I did it every Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern, and a lot of the same people would show up. And there'd be, it wasn't always 1,000 people, but it'd be, hundreds of people would show up,
Mhm.
and they got to know each other. And I realized how nervous I'd always been as a solo artist, like completely by myself, even back in the Barenaked Ladies days. If I had to, I would always say, standing on stage at Madison Square Garden in front of 20,000 people, no sweat. I mean, it's exciting, and it's kind of where I would thrive. But if I was at your house and someone
Oh,
said, "Oh,
yeah.
here's a guitar, play us a song," I would rather like jump out the window.
I'm so with you. Mhm.
Terrifying. Now I can do it, and it's because of that live stream. Those people who watched
Really?
the live streams watched me fail so miserably in a way that was like as humiliating to me as my most humiliating public moments, like getting arrested or whatever else. Like it was, except I could see their support and humor and forgiveness in the moment, which is you couldn't see that when you're dealing with legal troubles or whatever else in that time.
Alright.
I was able to find all the things. There are so many things that are terrible about parasocial relationships online and social media and what it does negatively to our brains. But at the same time, I also watched it create tons of positive things that have lasted. So when live in-person concerts started happening, and I would watch people get together, they would meet up at these shows, people that I could recognize them from my Zoom screens. It's like, oh, that person's from Scotland, that person's from Halifax, and that person's from northern BC, and they all are there in the audience together in whatever, New York City. It's amazing. So, I out of this started a Patreon, which is, kind of like a fan club meets a Kickstarter. Essentially, we
Yeah.
started it as a way to try and pay the bills and pay for studio space and that kind of stuff in those early live from home days. And this was like my wife, Christine, had been pushing me forever to start this Patreon. And I felt really weird about asking people for money in that way. It felt really icky. But I was making a new record. So it was an opportunity for people to feel like, A, I can contribute to making this new record. He's working outside of the system. And B, it helps to sustain this live from home thing. And I'd make the live from home videos available for download like the next day. So if you've paid to be a Patreon member, you get to download that or rewatch or watch a show if you've missed it. So there's 150 or so shows like that sitting on the website right now for those people. So they come to the shows, and part of their Patreon thing is they get to come for a sound check before the show
Hmm.
and a little meet and greet. But then it's about watching those people interact. And we've developed that now into, I live outside of Syracuse, New York. So we did a thing a few years ago where we did a picnic. We just got a license or a little a permit for a public park, part of a public park on the lake here. And let's see who comes. And my parents came, and Christine's parents came, and they grilled the hot dogs and hamburgers. And I did a little live set, and we had like 300 people came from all over the world for
Mm.
this thing.
Wow.
So since then, we started doing an actual like 5-day camp, like summer camp in the Catskills with lots of other musicians, and people come, and it's a social event as well as a musical event. And so all that stuff wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the pandemic. And it's not like the pandemic was good. The good thing was that I, I'm proud of myself for being able to go, okay, how do we make the best of this? I didn't think they were going to be long-term things. I thought they were just going to be kind of momentary ways of keeping myself sane and paying the heating bills or whatever else too.
Right.
Um,
But there's a spirit that you had of, well, just what you said. How do we make the best of this? And choosing to try to do that, and then obviously look at the success that came from it and all the fun new adventures and connections and communities that you built from that. But it began with that attitude of, okay, this stinks. What can we do to make the best of this? That does that attitude, would you say, trace back to the CBT training that you were talking about? I mean, as a coping strategy for anxiety, were you aware as you decided, okay, let me try this, or what could I do, or how could I, like, or focusing on, gee, look at all these lovely people on the screen connecting with one another and recognizing one another. Like, were you mindful of the intention with which you paid attention to that stuff and chose to have that attitude?
I think when it started, no, it was out of panic, and it was kind of like I was afraid of everything, and I think that's was always the case. That I approached a lot of things with fear. I knew that if I overcame that fear by actually doing the thing, that I could be good at something, or I could teach myself to be good at something. I could pass. It wasn't like, but I never had any kind of the sense of what the end result might be. So it was just like, how do I do something right now? I want to do something. I've always had the desire to learn more. So being able to just kind of learn, like figure out the tech and do it right and do it in a way that made me proud to have done it was exciting. And I was also, working on new music. So it was kind of felt like it was a way to feel relevant in the, because I think the other big thing that has really come out of it, probably the biggest thing that has come out of it for me, is that I've stopped competing with my younger self,
Oh,
and that was like when you have success when you're really young. Like I was 22 when our first album Gordon came out, and it was huge. It sold 1 million copies plus in Canada, and um, I didn't know how to grow up, first of all, but second of all, how do you beat
you
that
come
stuff?
out of the gate at the very top of the game, and then how do you sustain that or ever compare to that?
How do
Yeah.
you sing those songs as a person in their 40s, and you look back at something that an 18 or 19-year-old wrote, and you think, well, how do I ever top that, what that kid did? And I always think about, like, Orson Welles is the kind of the example people always use for somebody who had, their biggest success. Citizen Kane, I think he was 23 or something when he did that, and was essentially fighting and competing with and never matching his younger self the rest of his life. Meanwhile, doing incredible work, but it wasn't Citizen Kane. Not that Gordon was Citizen Kane, but it was mine in a way. Um,
Right.
and but also that you're trying to look for that level of success. And what happened in cultivating and nurturing this smaller audience was it made me okay with small, in a way that didn't feel kind of pathetic to me or like giving up. It felt
Mm.
like, okay, if nobody else is going to listen to this, these people are really invested in it. So you talked about that song Zoom. I mean, I wrote that song because I would do these live from home shows. Every show would be different. I wasn't going to do the same set list week after week. It's the same audience week after week. And I
Right.
try to treat it like it, rather than me doing a concert every week, it's more like this is the John Oliver show. Like it's a weekly show with a personality that you know and you trust and you are connected to, with different content. So I did things like I played every album, every Barenaked Ladies album, every solo album in order, including songs that I didn't sing on the original records or songs I'd never even played guitar on before, or hadn't played since the day I wrote them. So of course, they watched me. Some of those things fall apart terribly, and some were hilarious, and some were beautiful. But you run out of ideas and think, okay, let's do a show that is alphabetical. I'll choose 26 songs, one from each letter of the alphabet. But what do I have from that's Z? Well, I have nothing from Z.
So you wrote
I
Zoom.
wrote Zoom for those people. And I think, but it's writing music. That's when you go, I think that's when I afford myself the ability and the luxury or whatever to really think about what's the situation I'm in. What have I been part of building? And so it became a tribute to those people who are tuned in, but
Hmm.
also just to I think all of our ability to make do with what we have or make something fresh and wonderful out of what we have now.
Well, and pay attention to what we have
Yeah,
as opposed to
that's right.
comparing to something that we used to have or wondering if we'll ever have again. And
Mhm.
and it's I mean, just to tie it all in, it's why I'm recording this podcast with my crummy voice. I don't know if it's going to get better. I'm pretty sure it will, but I don't know what it's going to sound like. But this is what I am right now, and this is what I have. I think that idea of um, what you said, not comparing to your younger self, is such a boy, a gift that we can all give ourselves. And I also am really interested at the moment for myself in something that kind of ties in with a lot of what you just said. There's a lot of research to support this, but I also know it from experience. The idea that the more we do new things and things that can feel hard and get through them, whether we fall on our face or not, it gets easier to do hard things the next time. And I wonder if the times that you fell flat on your face on your live shows, at least live stream shows or whatever, and just had to keep going because there's everybody right there live. Not to mention all the many decades of experience you've had going through challenges of live performance and so on. But do you feel that the hard things, and we can also talk about the hard things that happen. You had to end a relationship with a group of dear friends with whom you'd spent roughly 20 years
Mhm.
together, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You had this very public breakup. I mean, that's an extraordinarily hard thing. Um, you had to navigate a lot of unknowns with that.
Yeah.
I kind of want to ask you about that separately, but do you think that overcoming and surviving and thriving after something as hard as that must be fuel for you now when something that feels frightening comes up and you think, well, at some level, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're thinking, you know what? I've been through harder stuff and I can do this.
Yeah, I think 100% that does fuel how I work, how I move forward now. I think it took a really long time. In 2007, I got divorced, and then in 2008, I got arrested for drug possession. 2009, I split from Barenaked Ladies. So like those 3 years, it was just, like divorce upon divorce, really. Like, it's so much trauma and trauma for all the people around you. It just feels like, to me, it felt like, a, a battlefield the next morning. Like it just felt like just smoke was rising everywhere. And you think, well, God, I'm responsible for all of this. And how can you not like just beat yourself up for that kind of stuff? I mean, I'm so lucky that uh, my kids turned out as great as they did. I mean, that's a testament to their mom as much as it is to me. But like, they weren't going to get left behind, and that was the most important thing, more important than my public image or anything else at the time. But also then people start to gauge what you do. Like you're already competing with your old self and competing with your old band, and they're moving forward and you're moving forward. And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, they're Genesis and I'm Peter Gabriel. And then you realize, no, they're Genesis and I'm Steve Hackett. Okay, I'm actually Anthony Phillips I'm actually the original drummer before Phil Collins from, um,
Oh,
but once you're okay,
oh,
like it really honestly wasn't until the pandemic when I just thought like what I have that's small that I can nurture is special and worth all of the effort I put into it.
You
Um,
changed that voice in your head that sort of was making you, "Oh, but I'm not as great as, you know, as I'm no Peter Gabriel in this story."
right.
And you just decided to celebrate what you are and just be okay with it.
Or I
Yeah.
would spend too much time thinking nobody's noticing the great work I'm doing. Um, and then that overtakes so much of the space in your brain that could be devoted to great work. Um, so I think having that time away during the pandemic from being on stage, being on stage for me also means being away from home, right? Like one gig now is really 3 days away. So maybe you do 2 or 3 gigs, you're now away for a week. It's a real investment of your time, and you get used to a routine at home. And like I'm here in my studio right now. I I've never commuted to a job in my life, like not since I was 19 temping in the summer or something like that.
Right.
And when I'm home, I commute to the studio every day, and I come and I do work and I leave it here at the studio, and then I go home and have home life. It's great. And my wife works with me here, like doing the Patreon and the merchandise and all that kind of stuff. So we have a little cottage industry, and that's how I approach it. It's like we run a small store, or we sell jam, or whatever else. Like it's hard work, and you have to be consistent. Um, but I'm not looking to, sell it to Kraft Foods necessarily either. Although if Kraft Foods came knocking, I wouldn't necessarily say no. Um, but that kind of thing is like, now if I'm going to go do shows, I'm going to make sure that not only does the audience enjoy it, but that I relish every second. And it's made me a better singer, a better performer, and I think a better person to work with.
Hmm. And from what I've read in other conversations you've had, it's made your mental health better. It sounds like, music and creativity and these creative strategies for finding new ways to be your most extraordinary musical creative self. They're really important tools in your mental health toolbox because, as you described, it takes many years to implement those 10 sessions of CBT or what have you. I mean, mental health maintenance is an ongoing
Yeah.
issue, quite frankly, for all of us, I think.
Yeah, I mean I have to remind myself that, because if I feel myself, like for instance, I have a a habit of falling into depression that can be, in younger days, was severe and long lasting. And I think a testament to the work I've done and to the tools that I've gained, um, is that when it happens now, I'm knocking on wood, but
Mhm.
I'm also, I believe in the power of doing the work, whether it's with therapy and with medication and with tools like CBT, for example, that it's much briefer, and doesn't hasn't seemed to have gone quite as deep as it did in earlier times in my life, and that feels like to me a bit of a triumph. Like, oh, I am doing the right work.
Mm.
I just have to remember to forgive myself when I start to slip again, like when I start to feel it. Like, you know, my wife will say to me, maybe you should talk to a therapist again, it's been a while, and I hear, go to the principal's office, you're in trouble.
Right.
And that's not what she means. She knows, like, sometimes she can see before me. The nicest thing is that I can start to see now at the same time. Like, I think before I would be in denial about where my mental health was heading, um, until it was too late, until I'd caused some kind of damage in my life, not shown up for something, or, really hurt somebody's feelings or whatever else, in a way. Cause that's the stuff we often don't talk about when especially comes to depression, is it because it's such an inward struggle that sometimes we forget to talk about the huge impact it has on other people.
You have said, I read that you've said that I guess it was 2008 drug arrest that was, you had to go through so publicly was, if not the catalyst, sort of part of a catalyst in that string of divorces you were talking about, that made you really pay attention to your mental health and understand your behavior from your younger years and what was really be underneath it that you hadn't identified as depression and anxiety. Can you talk about that? And again, I see that as another example of something absolutely harrowing to go through that winds up having an unforeseen outcome that you couldn't have thought would be so positive as you're in
Right.
the thick of it, that actually took you to a better place, which is something that we can't be naive about, but sometimes excruciatingly hard things do open up possibilities of looking at life differently.
Mhm.
And that seems like one of a good example of that.
Yeah, it forced me to take care of myself. I'd been on medications before. I had been through therapy with various different therapists before, but my relationship with that whole process changed. Before I'd go to see a therapist, and I think my desire was always to impress them, like to want to be their friend or want to make them laugh or whatever it was, like entertain them in a way or make them think, oh, he's a good guy, which I didn't understand. That's not what it's about. Like they're there to help you, not to decide that oh, I wish we could be friends outside of this room. But that's like where my brain would always take that stuff. Um, I look back and I hate the fact that I was forced into making positive change, because I feel like in a way that was how I lived for a long time. And that's still my instinct, is like life's going to throw you a curveball and then you decide what you're going to do. Like you have to, it's as if I'm going to let life make these changes for me. In a way we have to resign ourselves to the fact that we can't control everything. But there are decisions to be made along the way that either get you into those problems or get you out of those problems. Remember when the charges were dropped eventually on the drug arrest, and I had said to my lawyer, I really appreciate this, and I thank you so much for getting me out of this. And he goes, "Oh, no, no, you got yourself out of this."
Hmm.
And that's like one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to me. But
That's
in a
power.
way,
Yeah.
really powerfully shifted the way I saw. It was like, oh, I made a bunch of decisions before, in my old life as well, positive ones that helped impact this. But also,
Yeah.
I wasn't just bad before this and good afterwards. I mean, there is nuance to all of this. But in the moment that all this happened, yeah, I had to go. If I wanted to see my kids, which I did, every time I went to go pick them up, I had to go have uh, a drug test, a urine test before I dropped them off, and another one after I dropped them off. That was, part of the
Wow.
agreement. So I had to be really accountable. So while I was there, I was speaking with a psychotherapist and a drug and alcohol counselor and so on. And so I had no choice at that point but to take it seriously. And luckily, I also found therapists who were fantastic, who really changed my idea of what talk therapy could be.
Hmm.
That I thought, these are people I admire and that I look up to, but who also see me for me and just want to help me. Not by virtue of my accomplishments or of my status or even whether I'm a nice guy or not, but it's just because I'm a human being
Hmm.
who needs help, and I think that's what started to change a lot of stuff for me.
Um, I read something that you said that I wanted you to unpack a little bit. You said this in an interview a few years ago, and it's so interesting to me. You said, "It's taken me years to realize that my mental health struggles are not what make me an artist. And the fact that I was an artist wasn't why I had mental health struggles." Can you tell me a bit more about unpack that a little?
Sure. I mean, when I was first diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety, and it's by different people, you can be. I was diagnosed as bipolar. I saw these things as a bit of a badge of honor, especially by being, think about being in the Barenaked Ladies, who were a band who, I mean, we were a great band. Don't get me wrong. I'm very proud of everything we did, but the way we were seen by the business and by our peers and even by some music lovers was that we were lightweight, that we were just a joke band, we were just a fly by night thing. It was a novelty. It wasn't real. Um, or it was corny, whatever, all those kinds of negatives. That's what it was always bouncing around in my head. And I could go, no, hey, I have depression.
I've
I'm
got some cred,
Yeah, exactly.
some gravitas.
I'm an actual, I'm a struggling artist here. And I've got the badge to prove it. I've got the diagnosis. And that's, I think, with one of the dangers sometimes of living in a culture that really, I mean, just a lot of these diagnoses, I mean, a lot of the idea of diagnosis is developed particularly so American doctors can submit services to insurance companies. I live in the US now, and my doctor, who's great, he sits there on his laptop typing the whole time I'm talking to him, because he's trying to get whatever treatments, whatever diagnoses through to the insurance company, like just to get them to approve, or they decline. So he just sends something else in order to get whatever blood work approved. And that's the culture of American medicine. So if the danger is if we use that to identify who we are, as opposed to these are the challenges we now have to work with. I want a name for the challenge, but it doesn't have to be my name. And I think for a lot of years I just used it as a way for me to see myself as about who I was, as opposed to developing an identity for myself that had nothing to do, also an identity that has nothing to do with being an artist either. I mean, an artist, I like to look at it as both my identity, because it's my vocation first and foremost. But I'm lucky enough to have a vocation that really feeds my spiritual needs, and uh, I'm proud to wear as my kind of my identity in a way.
Mm.
But I'm not proud to wear my mental health struggle as my identity. It's one of those things, just like my struggle with my weight. Those are things that I work. My identity is in certain. If I look deep inside, my fluctuation of my own weight is as much a part of my identity as my mental health is. And I don't necessarily, I know that if I approach myself, or I address myself even as a joke, as like, oh, I'm the fat guy from Barenaked Ladies. Um, People, yeah, they know they know who I'm talking about. And B, that diminishes all the work I've done. And it's the
Mhm.
same thing. If I'm the drugs guy or whatever else from Barenaked Ladies, it diminishes who I actually am and the work I do. And I can't afford that right now. Life's too short.
Well, and nobody, yeah, we got to be careful to the way we talk to ourselves,
Yes,
and the
exactly.
compassion that we have to,
Yeah.
as you mentioned earlier, we have to be a little compassionate to ourselves, and forgiving our whatever.
Well, for me, the other thing is productivity. Like and I will talk about this when I do public speaking about mental health, usually to people, whether it's corporate groups or healthcare groups, or groups of people who are struggling themselves. I mean, most people, there's somebody in every group who's struggling. Um, but I will talk about how when people ask me if they know I've been struggling, they'll say, "How are you?" Because they're trying to say in code, I see you. I understand you're struggling. I feel for you. I don't want to get too personal and ask you specifically, how is your depression or whatever else might be. Um, so they say, how are you? And of course, you're always going to get, from me, fine, I'm fine. And that's what most of us will say. We try to deflect. We don't really want to engage on that. Um, but the other thing I will always follow that up with is busy. If I tell you how busy I am, somehow that helps my brain deflect from how I'm actually doing. What I'm doing is the most important thing. And I know that when I'm on my way downhill into some kind of depression, the first thing I start doing is telling myself how unproductive I've been,
Mm.
how I haven't done enough work, like I didn't finish enough of a project today or whatever else. And I feel like that's like the thing that for some reason my brain tells me the world judging me the most harshly for. I mean, it's nonsense. I know it's nonsense, and now I know it's nonsense, and I know how to work around it. But it's funny how that idea of being productive is just as it's just as loud as the other stuff in my brain is.
Yeah, I mean, our whole society is driven, the productivity is the measuring stick against which we all seem to be measuring ourselves and one another. And it's interesting that part of what you've learned to do, as you said, is be happy with small and not comparing yourself to your previous productivity or the size of different venues and
Mhm.
whatever. And, but also um, be really appreciative and aware of what you have right now as opposed to measuring against what that voice long-standing pattern seems to be telling you you should be. I say all this to you because I recognize so much of this
Yeah.
in myself. That's when I start to feel down too, is when I think, well, you've excuse me, not been accomplishing much lately. So who does that leave you um to be? Does that one thing that I feel you accomplish so well, I shouldn't even call it an accomplishment, but one thing that you do with seemingly great passion is, as you said, give talks about. I know you're in Montreal recently, at a conference about ending homelessness, and you talk about your mental health publicly. Tell me about and sometimes it takes you away from your family, because you travel to do this sometimes, which again is a sacrifice. So there's a real sense of purpose there. Tell me, what does that action? Because I'm also interested in the idea that the actions we take can sort of mitigate our discomfort with uncertainty. Tell me what that does for you. That purpose of being open about your struggles.
It's quite an amazing thing. I've been lucky enough to do, do a handful of these kinds of talks every year. And I started around, I was 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. I was invited by the CBC radio show to guest host one of their Friday
Remember that.
shows,
Mm.
and the theme for that show was mental health. And the producer had said, "Well, you've been fairly public about your mental health stuff before," and I kind of took me off guard a little bit, and I thought, "Have I really?" And then I realized, obviously there was the publicness of the arrest and so on, which had already happened, and then and before that, yeah, I had mentioned depression in interviews, but I realized I was mentioning that more in the way of to try to position myself as a tortured artist.
Hmm.
So I felt like, oh, I don't know, have I actually been honest about this? So I went in. I thought, well, I bet again, I'm when I'm challenged to do something, I will always say yes, and then I will be terrified forever. Like I'm just, until the thing happens. My motto nowadays, this is a bit of a sidebar, but nowadays I will say this before we go on stage, or if someone in my band doesn't feel fully prepared, or we don't know if it's like feels like it's the wrong audience or whatever else, I always say, we're going to go out there and we're going to go do a thing. And then when that's over, we will have done a thing. And that's all we can do. And like, it's kind of my mantra. And it's like, sometimes there are repercussions from that thing you've done that you also have to deal with. But in general, that's all we can do is just go and do a thing. And
I love it.
it's like it's I think my bandmates both love it and also make fun of me for it because I do say it regularly, but I think it's like I'm psyching myself up to do this thing. So that's what I did with the current. And it went so well that they had me back the next week to do a phone-in version of the show, coast to coast to coast. And it was spectacular. It felt so good to hear ordinary Canadians sharing their stories along with these extraordinary people I had interviewed the week before. Um, and then I started getting some calls from speaking agencies and from other places that wanted me to come and share this. And I did. And every time I do it, I think, what am I doing here? Like this, I'm a fraud. Or why does anybody want to hear my story? Because, I don't have the kinds of trauma in my childhood that people expect. They expect me to say things that I'm not going to. My parents are great. My parents were so supportive of me and my brother. My parents were both teachers, really focused on us. We grew up, we weren't rich, but we weren't poor. We were on a teacher's salaries and living in the suburbs. And there were traumatic things, but they were kind of like as they say, first world problems. If you're trying to compare them to other people's traumas, but there's no accounting for what your brain does to you. And sharing my story, particularly people, I always think, well, I'm a rock star in some people's minds. So, like, how do they find connection there? Does that sound like me? I don't want to sound like I'm talking down to anybody else, but I realize, of course, I'm not talking down. Afterwards, it's the feedback or the Q&A section afterwards that, to me, makes it all worth it. When people feel like they have a chance to talk about their own struggle or their kids' struggle. I mean, the heartbreak that people have when they watch their kids struggling, and they can stand up in a room full of their colleagues, for example, and ask me a question. I can't give advice beyond my own experience, but I can listen and commiserate with people. And that's like, what an amazing opportunity.
And what does that do for you? What does it make you feel?
Oh, it makes me feel like I'm doing something right. Like, it makes me feel like, okay, I'm contributing in a way. And that, like, that's really rewarding to feel like I've, made even a tiniest positive difference. And then the other part of me is like, is the people pleaser, or the person who's addicted to applause, also likes that part too. So it does satisfy both the selfless and the selfish.
I want to end by asking you about something sort of more macro, because we've talked so much about, and you've been characteristically really open and vulnerable about all that you go through, and all your courage. In the spirit of navigating hard things and navigating uncertainties, as you mentioned, you live in the United States right now. And I have to ask what, the uncertainty as a progressive person and as a Canadian living in the United States for much of the time, how does how do you navigate all the wild uncertainty of this moment in that respect?
Um, well, it's scary because I've never felt so much like actions can be like random actions can change everything overnight. Like there are kind of random. It feels so violent, like the attitude of not just of the government, but the kind of the normalization of cruelty, for example. Like, oh, finally we can be the cruel people we wanted to be, but we were holding back. Is like that is so much in the culture. But I've lived down here long enough, and of course I'm in Canada all the time between my family being there and I work there all the time. That I've been able to keep my finger on the pulse in both places. And I think my biggest concern has always been Canadian complacency, the Canadian superiority complex. I think we because we have so many great things going for us, and we have but we watched, starting with the pandemic, we watched our values being tested in a way that were shocking. That was shocking to me and shocking to lots of us. And we're like, this is not what I thought Canada was. We are so close to tipping over the precipice. Quite often we choose we look at the chaos in the United States and we go, I think I want a bit of that. Like, I'm always worried that that's like, that's what the constant re-election of the Ford government in Ontario always says to me. It's just like, oh, deep down inside, people want a little bit of what America has. And I think, if we're not careful, we're going to get it. And I think we have a lot to hang on to. And so I think there are wonderful things in the United States. I've always felt that. Like, ever since I started touring down here in 1992, you go, oh, I didn't realize that there were progressives here. Like, I didn't realize there are people who thought the same way. They might envy some of the things we have in Canada, but they also have amazing, whether it's arts communities or mutual aid situations that are in cities and in rural areas across the United States. I mean, it's a beautiful landscape. It feels so connected to me to our Canadian experience. And that we have lots to learn from each other, positive and negative. So I feel like, in a way, I'm slightly, and also, you know what, like, my wife is American and she's in a situation where she thinks the whole world hates us right now. Like, how much that must hurt. Imagine how we would feel if we felt like the whole world hated us, and perhaps with reason. And so that's taxing on the American mental health right now, I think, and I think they need our sympathy that way too, and our empathy at least.
Hmm. I see Kevin Fox and Craig Northey's photos in the background of your studio where you are, and they are the other two legs of the Stephen Page trio stool. And I said that I wanted to ask you about Norway, and I can't let you go.
Yeah.
I just have to tell that story, or you do, about you and I, or used to be neighbors when you lived in Toronto, and our kids crossed paths in schools and programs and things. And then I haven't seen you for a long time. And then this summer, the most random thing happened, the most random coincidence I don't know if you even remember when you were on stage in Norway with Kevin Fox and Craig performing at a show. And Kevin and I used to play in a band together called Bag of Hammers. Can I let you tell the story
Oh,
from there?
sure. So I've been involved in this group called Canada's Great Kitchen Party for several years, and they do a bunch of great fundraising for things like Music Counts and Spirit North and a bunch of local food security programs around Canada. But part of the way that they make the money to pay for these charitable interests are they auction off amazing trips around the world, and they may be like, hey, you could go to South Africa with Jim Cuddy, or you go to Peru with Gowan, or whatever it might be. And so
Right,
in
right.
this case, it was like go to Norway with Stephen Page and Stephen Page Trio, and also the Trans Canada Highwaymen, which is this group I have with Chris Murphy from Sloan and
Yeah.
Mo Berg from Pursuit of Happiness. And so we were playing a show. It's amazing. These are the great trips. You get to hike and eat great food and see beautiful sights. And then we play a bunch of concerts at night. And one night we were playing the Stephen Page Trio, and yeah, we're riffing about the names of bands that we were in. And I certainly knew this about Kevin, but Kevin Fox, who plays cello with us, was talking about his old band from Montreal, Bag of Hammers, and we rib him about the band name a little bit, but I think I don't think it's that bad. I think it's pretty good. But he's mentioning Bag of Hammers, and somebody from the audience yells, Jill Deacon.
I love that. You're in like a small town in Norway and someone yells my name. In that person is an old longtime family friend who he and his wife had treated themselves to be on this trip
Awesome.
with you in Norway. And he remembered, because it is such an
Yeah.
unusual name, he remembered, hey, Jill Deacon was in that band. So he shouts out, and as I understand it from him, um, and in fact, Kevin Fox FaceTimed me the next day with my old friend,
Awesome.
to say hi, and I hadn't seen Kevin in years either. I understand his head nearly popped off his body when he's like, "What? How did you is this happening in the middle of Norway?" There's a lovely little moment of
Great.
joy and surprise that, always makes my day when I think of that story. Stephen, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you for the
It's
conversation.
great
You
to talk
are
to
a
you.
gem. Really good to hear how well you're doing and how much you are really embodying a love affair with the unknown, I'll say, and how you're getting through these days. All the best to you, and thanks so much for the chat.
Thanks, Jill. Happy healing.